We're learning the U.S.-led coalition in Syria has launched new airstrikes and coordinated attacks against the terror group, targeting their financial centers and other facilities in eastern Syria last week. The deputy commander saying in a statement that ISIS still presents a, quote, very real threat to the long-term stability in the region, adding our mission remains the same, the enduring defeat of ISIS. Joining me, retired General Mark Kimmitt, along with Abby Livingston and Mark Caputo. Thank you all for being with us on this holiday Wednesday. And General Kimmitt, let me start with you. Seems to be a disconnect, potentially, between what President Trump is saying and what we are hearing from the commander on the ground working to defeat ISIS. Why?
Well, first of all, I don't want to parse words, but Chris Kika, who I know well, who made that announcement, was correct. He said the enduring defeat of ISIS. We have defeated ISIS, according to the president. But I think what we need to do is focus on the fact that ISIS cannot return. Those strikes that were done last week are keeping them on their back feet. And I think what we're going to need to do is continue those strikes even after we pull the ground troops out.
And do you think the groundwork has been laid for the coalition troops to be able to do that, General?
Well, I think if you take a look at what we've done in Iraq, that's the model that we'll probably follow in Syria. We use a by, with, and through strategy in Iraq. We haven't been doing the fighting. The Iraqis have been doing the fighting. We provided the air support, the logistics, the training. Now that we're pulling out the ground troops, I hope that we adopt and embrace that same strategy that has been so successful in Iraq over to Syria.
Mark, the president had a sort of another Twitter announcement over this holiday weekend where he said, thanks to Saudi A, as he put it, when he said that country, Saudi Arabia, has agreed to spend the necessary money, he says, needed to help rebuild Syria instead of the United States, saying, see, isn't that nice? But Al Jazeera reports the initial reaction to that announcement was one of bafflement. No other U.S. officials had commented, they say. The president was not scheduled to be on the phone with Saudi leadership. What is up with this? Did this announcement come out of nowhere? Do you have any more details?
Well, standard disclaimer is that you never really want to guess what Donald Trump is talking about unless the president says it himself. One thing that I think is really important to point out is Syria's government, Assad, is Shiite, essentially. He's Alawite, a sect of the Shiite branch of Islam. And the Saudis are Sunni. And the two don't really get along. In fact, Syria's government is more closely aligned with Iran than it is with Saudi Arabia. So the idea that suddenly Saudi Arabia would be like, hey, we're going to give a whole bunch of billions of dollars over to Assad and to our Shiite sometime opponents kind of strikes me as odd, and I guess it strikes the Saudis as odd. But then again, the president has had a history of saying other countries are going to pay for things the United States wants. For instance, Mexico is going to pay for the border wall. They're not doing that, and now apparently Saudi is going to pay for Syria to be rebuilt and to be happy. So we're going to have to wait and see.
Well, General Kimmitt, let me get you on that. What is in it for Saudi? Why would Saudi Arabia pay to rebuild Syria?
Well, first of all, I don't see that distinction between Shia and Sunni to be as significant as Mark would say. In fact, Syrians are Arabs, Saudis are Arabs, but there's been a long-term relationship between Saudi Arabia that goes back years and years. As you remember, Syria was part of the United Arab Republic between Egypt, Syria, and Baghdad at that time, years ago under Nasser. Yes, he is Alawite. Yes, that's a sect of Shia. Yes, that's one of the reasons, perhaps, why they have this close relationship with Iran. But there has been a long-term historical relationship between Syria and Saudi Arabia that, quite frankly, goes well beyond and well further back than the relationship between the Persians and the Arabs.
All of this, the discussion about placement of troops, about the U.S. military presence around the world, comes at a pretty sensitive time because Jim Mattis is leaving the Pentagon, which we knew before this weekend. What we didn't know is that he'd be leaving in less than a week. The expectation, based on Secretary Mattis's resignation letter, was he'd be out at the end of February, Abby. President said, nope, it's going to be January 1st. And based on our reporting, defense and administration officials said President Trump did not tell Mattis himself. Secretary Pompeo is the one who made the call. And yet, Abby, the secretary still delivered that holiday message to troops. Quote, storm clouds loom, yet because of you, he said, your fellow citizens, all of us, live safe at home.
I know it's been absolutely incredible to just announce this major military pullout. and then disrupt your Pentagon. And I mean, it is just absolutely amazing. There's going to be very little time for transition. And I mean, Mattis is very subtly, both in the letter to the troops and to the letter to the president, undermining the president's branding on the Syria operation, that everything's going well. And it's quite extraordinary. I mean, I keep thinking back to President Bush and Mission Accomplished. And presidents have got to be very careful about how they brand, and I don't even know if that's the right word, military operations.
General Kimmett, I only have a couple of seconds left, but quickly to you. Patrick Shanahan will become the person who will lead the Department of Defense on at least an interim basis. Are you confident in his ability to bring the troops together over the next however many months?
Well, I certainly am, but more importantly, General Votel, who commands CENTCOM, General Camara, who commands the troops on the ground, they're not going anywhere. They're going to make some modifications to their plans, but I think what's happening back in Washington is far less significant than what's actually happening on the ground.
General Mark Kimmett, I appreciate your perspective and for you coming back on the show. Thanks. Abby and Mark, stick around a little longer, please. So if you had the desire to call the White House switchboard right now, you're not going to get very far because nobody is there to take your call. Literally, without any government money, the phones are ringing and ringing and ringing. In other words, as the Washington Post puts it, the message might as well be, you have reached the White House. We are not functioning. Please try again later. Inside the White House, the president is essentially home alone. Controversy and confusion swirling around a bunch of issues, including the U.S. withdrawal from Syria and Afghanistan, the defense secretary's resignation over that decision, a partial government shutdown, and a stock market that plunged, all of it just in the last week or so. Joining me now, Dana Milbank, who wrote that piece for The Post, along with Abby Livingston and Mark Caputo back with us. And Dana, let me start with you. It's nice to see you on set.
Good to see you.
Take us inside Donald Trump's White House this morning.
See, I have this sort of Dickensian picture of him in the bathrobe and a nightcap with a candlestick, running around with the red Christmas trees wailing about being all alone. No, the families.
The Ebenezer Trump factor, if you will.
The Ebenezer Trump. You know, the families. Oh, you know, his wife was only here under duress. He's got very few advisors.
Now, you say that tongue-in-cheek. She did come back from Mar-a-Lago, of course. But there is a lot of confusion surrounding sort of some of
and he is
politics.
missing all these advisors in key positions, and it's basically one man running the show.
You put it this way in your Dana Milbanksian way. You say not a creature is stirring inside the Trump administration. We now have an acting defense secretary, acting attorney general, acting EPA administrator. There is an acting White House chief of staff as of the first of the year. No interior secretary, and the UN ambassador.
No UN ambassador.
Not in there yet.
Right, and the guy who's acting as Attorney General was in a job recently where he was selling hot tubs. So you know, it doesn't give a sense that everything's really under great control. As the president might said, what's going on in this country is a disgrace, but Merry Christmas.
Well, we have that sound. Let's play it for Abby and Mark here, because that was a comment that the president made when he was doing this, what we call before the airing of the grievances with reporters on Christmas Day. Almost 10 minutes, though, taking questions from reporters asking about everything from the wall, the shutdown, to the Fed. Watch.
Take Comey. Everybody hated Comey. They thought he did a horrible job. Literally, the day before I fired him, they were saying he should be fired. As soon as I fired him, they said, oh, what did you fire him for? That was a terrible thing to do. It's a disgrace what's happening in our country. But other than that, I wish everybody a very Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, Mark. That's the message from the president, I guess.
You know, this is a tough act to follow, both what the president said and what Dana Milbank just said. So, you know, this is the Trump presidency. I'm going to be dumb here and make a prediction that if you look at President Obama having gotten, in his own words, shellacked at his first midterm and a second midterm and going on to win re-election, you really wonder if President Trump is going to be able, in his own way, to mimic that and also ride this wave, his Trumpian wave, and in his Trumpian style to his own re-election. Because one thing that's surprising about President Trump is that every opportunity to kind of go along to get along, he is not taking it. And we're seeing that in spades here. And I was among those surprised that the polls were wrong and that he won his election in 2016. I'm not going to count him out in 2020 because he has his own style and it really excites his base. And his base is among the most rabid I've ever seen in politics. Dana,
let me play off you on that, because far be it from me, but might the strategy that Mark talks about, or the way that the president acts, refusing to go along to get along, as he put it, might that not actually help the president politically with his supporters down the road? Because frankly, they do like that he is holding firm on this wall and saying,
certainly,
why not? I've heard from people who say, shut the government down, screw Washington.
They like what's going on with the wall. They're not going to like what's been going on with the market. You know, it fluctuates day to day, but it's taken a real hit. They're going to notice it if, heaven forbid, a recession comes or even slower growth. That's really going to have an impact here. And we've not seen, previous presidents at similar points, Clinton, George W. Bush, Obama, have all made pivots, and we see no pivoting. We're just keeps turning towards the base over and over.
Abby, how does that position him coming into the new year? Because the New York Times has some reporting out, and I'm going to read it to you, that the president has grown more sure of his own judgment, that's critical, and more cut off from anyone else's than at any point since taking office. He spends ever more time in front of a TV, often retreating to his residence out of concern he's being watched too closely. Can you believe this? He has said as he scanned the torrent of headlines, I'm doing great, but it's a war every day. How does that translate to 2019's version of Donald Trump?
Well, I'll just remind everyone, Nancy Pelosi is going to take the speaker's gavel in about a week. Yeah. And so on top of that, you have subpoenas on the House side. But these vacancies, whether the cabinet official left on their own merit or Trump fired them or they're leaving because of malfeasance, alleged malfeasance, this means their would-be successors are going to have to testify in front of the Senate. And so we're going to have grievances aired in the other direction from the Democrats in both chambers, and Trump does not seem to realize what is coming, and it is going to be very dramatic, I believe.
Dana, quick final thoughts to you.
Well, I think he does have a sense of what's coming. I think that's why we're seeing some of this hysteria now. You always know when there's all these outbursts, something bad's about to happen.
And that bad thing in the eyes of the president is Nancy Pelosi coming in, along with the Democrats. As Abby does point out, January 3rd.
It's the whole world is about to change for him, and he's all alone.
Dana Milbank. Dana, thank you for coming on. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Abby and Mark, hang out a little bit longer, please.
Let's bring in the panel now. Doug Thornell is managing director of the political consulting firm SKD Knickerbocker. He's also a former senior advisor to the DNC. Matt Gorman is a former communications director to the National Republican Congressional Committee. And Abby Livingston is Washington bureau chief for the Texas Tribune. A big thanks to all of you for being with me on this day after Christmas. Matt, I'll start with you. What might the president's strategy be here?
Well, the only thing that matters here, the only thing, is what he and Leader Schumer can agree to. I think they both know they need Democratic votes here to get this thing done and reopen the government. But at least for President Trump, and I believe for Leader Schumer too, there's absolutely no incentive to give in right now. It's riling up both their respective bases, and I think that's why we're very far apart, as Garrett said, on a solution. And I think as everyone knows, Republicans' leverage is rapidly diminishing. As we get to January 3rd, there's absolutely no way that Speaker Pelosi is going to approve funding for a wall, especially if they couldn't get it done with 2 years of a united GOP Congress. So right now, the only thing that matters is what President Trump and Chuck Schumer can agree to.
Doug, if you were consulting Chuck and Nancy, as the president likes to call them, how would you advise that they handle the standoff from here?
Well, I would tell them to keep doing what they're doing. I mean, Trump is sort of negotiating against himself. We don't really know what he wants. Last week, he was sort of all over the place. The administration was all over the place in terms of first sort of accepting the deal that congressional Democrats and Republicans had reached, and then backed away because of pressure from the far right. And then today, and yesterday, you heard him talking about, well, we are building a wall, and then we need, but we need a wall. And he has said in the past that our southern border is secure, and then on the same day said that all these terrorists are pouring in. So we don't really know exactly what Trump wants. It's hard to negotiate with someone who really can't say what he wants. He thought, first it was a brick wall. Now it seems like steel slates or a fence. Democrats want border security. We're all for that. We want the government to be open. This is the third shutdown under President Trump. And, Americans are really just getting scrooged by this guy right now.
Matt, the president says that he wants this wall built by 2020. He clearly believes that this is a winning issue for him politically. How big of a deal is this wall? How big of a deal is it to Republicans that you talk to?
Oh, it absolutely is. It was the central campaign promise that he made in 2016. I think what we're seeing here more broadly is essentially the announcement of the president's reelection campaign. And Chuck and Nancy, so to speak, are the replication of Hillary Clinton from 2016. The president is best when he has an enemy. And he had it in Hillary Clinton in 2016. He's now moving into having one with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer now, and he will use them until there's a Democratic frontrunner coming out of the primaries. So I think what we're seeing more than anything else is him kickstarting his reelection campaign and firing up that base, which might have been dormant for the last 2 years. And I think, what we're going to see in the next couple of years is, again, a way for him to kick up the base and make sure that they're revved up in time for Election Day 2020.
Abby, President Trump, he mentioned your home state of Texas the other day. Here's what the president said.
Yesterday, I gave out 115 miles worth of wall, 115 miles in Texas. And it's going to be built, hopefully rapidly. I'm going there at the end of January for the start of construction. The new piece, the new section is very, very exciting, what's going on there. And you'll see it. Because in January, I'm going there. We're almost having a groundbreaking. It's such a big section. It's probably the biggest section we'll get out.
First of all, President Trump obviously can't award contracts on his own. But Abby, do we know what he is talking about there?
My understanding is this is all very unclear, and it may be Trump riffing. But what I can tell you in the state of Texas, border security is a very complex issue. It is the dominant issue in Republican U.S. House primaries. It's see who can get as far as they can to the right. But on the flip side, building a border wall is very difficult because of eminent domain. And ranchers down on the border tend to not like it when the government comes in and wants to take its property. So even if Trump is able to allocate this money, which I'm not sure he is, you could get into some serious legal wrangling, and I can tell you attorneys in Texas are starting to gear up for that sort of litigation.
That's a part of the story that doesn't get talked about a lot, the fact that a lot of the land that would be required to build the wall that the president wants to build, that's privately owned land. Never mind the natural barriers that exist there, whether it's the Rio Grande or it's, but again, that's not something that a lot of folks talk about. It sounds like something, Abby, that they do talk about there in Texas, though.
Absolutely. And I mean, violation of eminent domain is a conservative principle. And so a couple years ago, we polled the entire delegation of Texas, all 38 members, and nobody from Texas 2 years ago wanted a border wall from sea to shining sea, from San Diego to Brownsville. They want bits and pieces, but you start getting into some really dicey conservative politics when you start taking people's property.
Doug, on the standoff, how long do you suppose that this thing is going to go, and how do you think it's going to play out?
I think it's likely that it's going to go through the new year, and then I think that when Nancy Pelosi takes over the speakership, I think she'll work with Mitch McConnell and Schumer in the White House, and I think it'll come to end shortly after that. I don't see it ending before then. And to your discussion with Abby just a little while ago, I mean, we've also forgotten the other key point to this, which was Mexico was supposed to pay for this wall.
That's true.
That was a central plank of the president's campaign. That's what he, when he was doing his call and repeats in the, on the trail, that's what the audience would always fire back with. And that was a failure on the president's part. And so now we're stuck with the taxpayers now being asked to pay for this wasteful government project that's not going to really help us secure the border.
Although the administration has pointed out from time to time when pressed on Mexico paying for the wall, they insist that they are going to still pay for the wall, albeit indirectly. That's the line typically from the administration. Doug, you pointed out, again, this is the third shutdown under this president. Do you think that we've become a bit desensitized to even partial government shutdowns? It does not seem as if people are taking to the streets just yet. Again, granted, we are only 5 days in, but do you think we've gotten, unfortunately, used to lawmakers not being able to fulfill what would seem to be one of the most basic responsibilities of their job, just keeping the government open?
Right. This is a basic responsibility of the president and Congress. Republicans rule all three branches. I worry that, the chaos and dysfunction that we see out of this White House on a daily basis does maybe desensitize us a bit. I think on the progressive side, though, that, this is getting to be, sort of just a bit too much. Every other day or every day, really, we seem like we're dealing with the president's dealing with a different crisis of his making. Shutting down the government, even if it's a partial shutdown, that's a real serious deal. Hundreds of thousands of Americans are going to be impacted by that, whether they are being furloughed or just the sort of, uncertainty that it's going to cause the market. And we saw what has happened to the stock market the last several weeks. It's not good. It's going to hurt. It's going to hurt our economy. It's not good for our workers, and it's just overall not good for the positioning of this country globally.
Abby, Matt, thank you. Doug, always good to have you. Thank you as well, sir. The panel is back with me. Abby Livingston, Doug Thornell, Matt Gorman. Abby, let me start with you here. The Commissioner of Customs and Border Protection now calling on Congress to help with this growing humanitarian crisis at the border. This is what he had to say this morning.
Our stations are not built for that group that's crossing today. They were built 30, 40 years ago for single adult males, and we need a different approach. We need help from Congress. We need to budget for medical care and mental health care for children in our facilities.
Abby, can Congress help this situation? And if so, what can they do?
Well, I am not totally well versed on this front, but what I can tell you is even though this is going to weigh on Congress in this way, and it should on the president, we just got through with the midterms, and Republicans were just, the female vote turned against the Republicans in a big way. And I can just tell you down in Texas, women from all racial backgrounds have looked at this and said this is not acceptable for our government to not be following through and being, when you have now 2 children who have died in custody. So I think that we are still in a shutdown, but I don't sense any urgency of Congress, at least the House, coming back before swearing in on January 3rd. But this is going to be a pressing issue that doesn't seem to be letting up. We've been talking about this for 6 months, and it doesn't seem to be getting better.
The CBP commissioner also confirmed this morning that 2 migrant children have died in U.S. custody. But take a listen to Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen saying she didn't know the exact number of deaths. This is Secretary Nielsen during her Capitol Hill testimony last week.
Did I understand you correctly to say that as you sit here today, you do not know how many human beings have died while in the custody of the department that you lead? And you, in preparation for today's hearing, you didn't ascertain that number, but you don't know it today?
I don't have an exact figure for you.
Do you have a rough idea?
Sir, what I can tell you
I'm
is...
talking about people who have died in your custody. You don't have the number?
I will get back to you with the number.
Okay.
What's the general feeling there in Texas with regards to these 2 young children who died while in custody?
I would think most people in Texas are not happy about this. The one thing I can say is that we are in the middle of the holidays, and we have had just a crazy news cycle. I do wonder, given the stock markets, Mattis, how much this is breaking through, both in Texas and beyond. But I do think that we will see this revisited by Democrats when they take control of the House.
You think it's gotten lost in the noise?
I think a lot of things have gotten lost in the noise in the last week.
Yes, truer words have probably not been spoken. Abby, thank you. Matt, good to have you. Doug, always a pleasure. Thank you guys.